Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Play season-long best ball, fantasy drafts where you only focus on the most fun part of fantasy, drafting your team. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. Underdog handles the rest for you. No waivers, trades, or setting your lineups each week. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100. Get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.
When it comes to wardrobe staples, the things that feel as good as they look are what we wear again and again. But finding those perfect closet additions can be tough, especially in the shoe department. Unless you're shopping at Rothy's and their sustainably made, machine-washable shoes that are built to last because they knit both style and comfort into every pair. The Rothy's signature sneaker combines game-changing comfort with a tirelessly cool look, so it goes with every outfit, from casual to elevated. And their one-of-a-kind driving loafers feel great with or without socks and come in classic colors and eye-catching patterns. Forget about the break-in periods you expect from other shoes. The soft, flexible materials and wildly comfortable Rothy's insoles make their shoes one of the most wearable right out of the box. Find out what the hype is all about. Discover your new favorite pair of shoes and get $20 off your first purchase at rothys.com/hype. That's ROTHYS.com/hype.
Hey folks, a little bit different setting tonight. I am not in my at home in my studio. I am gone for the weekend, so I forgot to bring my equipment, so I'm actually recording this on my phone. But today's episode is with James Scanlan, and we recorded this a while back, talking about walking from Morocco to the UK, back home to the UK. So James lives in Egypt. Really cool backstory, where he's from, how he ended up there, and what he and his partner, they just enjoy taking walks. That's literally like their hobby. So just around the neighborhood in the evenings. Personally, I've taken a lot of walks lately, like after dinner. If it's still early enough, my family and I will go on a walk. It's awesome. Well, James cranked that up quite a bit, decided to walk from Morocco, of all places, just literally to go kind of laterally across the planet to Morocco from Egypt, and then walk back home to the UK. And so this is that story. Amazing. I love the simplicity of walking. You know, we've had tons of walkers on the show over the years. And I love talking to them because it's just a pace and a way of traveling and a way of adventuring that's so accessible for so many of us. A lot of us can walk. Most of us probably can walk. Doesn't take tons of practice or skill. Just takes doing it. That's about it. So enjoy this episode, and we will be talking again on Thursday. All right, folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. James Scanlan is with us today. James, how you doing?
Amazing. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's a early morning here. Not early morning, it's mid-morning here, but it's one of the first things I'm doing today. Where are you coming from?
So I'm currently in Dahab in South Sinai in Egypt.
Well, tell me, you say you're in Egypt. What time is it there?
So it's currently about 4:10 in Egypt.
Oh, wow. So I didn't know if you were going to be coming from Egypt or coming from the UK somewhere. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah. I don't know, have you ever been out here before? It's quite a nice
No, I've never been to Egypt.
For people interested in adventure and sports, which I guess most of your listeners are, this is an ideal spot. It's right near the mountains. You got St. Catherine's and Mount Sinai nearby for hiking and stuff like that. And then you got the Gulf of Aqaba, which is a massive sort of gulf between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, which is a big spot for scuba diving and free diving and kite surfing. And it's currently really, really windy, so everyone is out kite surfing, apart from me who's inside.
Oh, man. So do you kite surf?
No, I don't actually, but it's on my list of things to try.
Okay, as long as we're not keeping you from a perfect kite surfing day, I don't feel so bad.
At the moment, I surf, but I'm more of the kind of, I enjoy watching them, and I'd rather go for a nice long walk or a swim But then who knows?
So we haven't really talked to many people in Egypt or in Cairo or in that area. Is it, are, all those sports are possible? Are people doing those? Like you said, guys, kite surfing, a lot of people might be out, but are people hiking on the trails and biking and all that? Is it pretty heavily used?
I'd say it's pretty lightly used. I think it's not very common. Although Egypt is a massive population and lots of potential. There's lots of things that are going on, but it's quite, I guess, limited to a certain extent. There's a Sinai Trail which crosses the whole of the Sinai Peninsula, which is something you can do with Bedouin guides and camels and camp out under the stars and with a fire and whatnot. But I think that's the only organized or like trail actually in Egypt, like long distance trail, I should say. Otherwise, there are a lot of people who have made their own routes, like unofficial things. A lot of people have, for example, walked the length of the Nile, which is a wonderful thing to do. Cycled the length of the Nile. There's lots of that going on. I personally have walked the length from Cairo to Alexandria along the Nile there. It's something I'm still doing now. I keep exploring that area because you meet so many interesting people, and that's where you meet lots of variety and kind of different things of life going on in Egypt, which is the wonderful thing about it. Most wonderful thing about walking, which is why was my favorite sort of adventure sport as it was.
It's beautiful. It's one of the most simple things you can do as well. In a lot of ways, you just start walking. What a great pace. I was just talking, I'm more of a cyclist. I love to bike tour, and I love that pace, 10, 11 miles an hour,
Yeah.
6, 11, so, it's 15, 16 kilometers an hour or so. And I just love that pace because it makes a few more things tangible and you don't have to carry it on your back. But walking is also incredibly popular with through hiking and backpacking. Love that. But how did you end up in Egypt, and how long have you been there? I'd love to know. I don't think that's where you were born.
So I'm from the UK, from the southwest of England, a place called Taunton. But I went to university to study Arabic, and that eventually took me to live in Egypt, where I used to work in a publishing house here, and I just fell in love with the language and I wanted to spend more time here. And so after a year in Egypt, I then flew to Morocco and walked back to England, which is the subject of my book about walking home. But after that, I came back to Egypt because I just missed it so much, missed the language, missed the culture. And now I ended up getting married here, and I live here. And so it's kind of my second home, as it were.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what made you want to study Arabic in the first place? What got you interested in that? Because there's got to be a story there.
A bit random, I suppose. I mean, I was living in France, working on a farm for about a year there. Really unsure what I was doing with my life. I was about 21, and I basically had moved to France to basically try and learn the language, and did that by working and living there. And I came back to England after a year, and I thought, I'd like to get a job, like to try and do something with languages. And then I decided to go back to university and do a language that's a bit different, something that I hadn't heard of before, I hadn't experienced before, and that was Arabic. Not just because it was the first on the alphabet on the list of things I saw, but I guess it was at the same time. And so I applied to university in Exeter and just enjoyed it, fell in love with the literature and the language, and then the dialects of language that you have all over the Arabic-speaking world. And that's what led me to be now a translator, which is basically how I sustain my life of, walking and trying to write about travel and that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I've kind of, although it doesn't seem like it at the time, I've kind of directed my life towards kind of a way that I can live out all my passions at once, if you see what I mean.
That is so interesting. So studying the language, wanting to be in Egypt. What was one of the first ways you put that language to use? Was it through teaching English?
I think I did teach English. Yeah, I taught English like very informally. I'd come back from work and I wanted to try and meet people, and so I'd just through word of mouth kind of meet friends of friends at various street cafes in Cairo and teach them colloquial English, teach them very badly, just sit down and talk with them, and then they'd pay for my coffee. I felt too embarrassed to take money from people because I wasn't a teacher. I was enjoying just having a conversation with someone in English and then learning Arabic off them. But apart from that, my exposure to language is just being here and walking around. I mean, that's the thing about walking. I haven't got much experience with cycling, but I think it's probably the same. Is it because you're so kind of slow and kind of you can be quite vulnerable, just one person on your own. It attracts kind of people to come to you, and especially if you're walking in a big backpack on your back, when you're walking and you look like a foreigner, for example, someone's going to come up to you and say, "Hey, what's this guy doing here?" And as long as you've got a smile on your face and you can say hello and they pass a few pleasantries, you can really get stuck into their life and hearing about their day. Like one of the main things I like doing when I'm walking around here, well, now with my wife, we walk around Egypt and explore. Well, for me, it's exploring my second home. For her, it's exploring her own home. We like to ask people the question of, how do you spend your day? It's a really simple question that kind of breaks down barriers. And when you get a man who's or an older person who's sitting outside and sees us coming, and they get this kind of question of how they spend their day. At first, they're a bit confused, and they kind of just start sprouting forth of their life, what they do, the things they do in the day, and there's they might think they do nothing, but surprising amount of things that someone who seems to do nothing does in a day. And then that sprouts conversations of what they used to do when they were younger, and then what we do during our day. And that's the thing that I like about walking is those sort of conversations that come out of it.
What do you, I love that, by the way. And cycling definitely gets the same thing. You might be going a little too quick if you're, going downhill, especially, just physics, you're kind of going fast. But usually there are plenty of interactions through the day because you're a spectacle. And people are very curious about where you're going, where you're coming from, and what you're doing. And so I can imagine by walking, especially on a journey, it's absolutely the same with the backpack. But around your home, that's kind of unique. We don't hear about that a lot here in the States, people walking around in order to have conversations.
Yeah.
Anything you do with these conversations, do you collect them, just want to learn from them, or is it just something you enjoy doing?
I think all three of those, really.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's just something that's I have a passion for walking, and I love writing. So I maintain a blog where I kind of write my kind of account of these journeys and things we've heard from people. But because I'll always be a tourist essentially living in Egypt, the fact that my wife is Egyptian, and for her, she's exploring her own country, which I've done it myself in England, and it's just a wonderful thing where you see your own place in a completely different light. And so when I see it to her, I can see the things that she asks people and the conversations they have. Egyptians talking to Egyptians, and I love just being there like a fly on the wall, and I can kind of jump in occasionally, and I like just being there and listening and noting it down. And then at the end of the day, my wife and she tends to write her own account of it, and I'll write my own, and they'll be completely different because we have a different point of view of these things. I'm more of the I tend to get kind of like, oh wow, this is amazing, this person's amazing, look at this thing, and she'll have more of a nuanced cultural look at it because she comes from actually living there. And I just love learning about that.
Can you do that back in your first home, your other home in the UK, or is it harder to do or just different?
That's a really good question. I think I've done that a few times with my wife. We walked around the UK, and it's very different. Obviously, there's here, I think maybe the climate is the first thing, because here when we walk along, you tend to have the older generations are sitting outside. Like the track will tend to go past a house. There's always someone sitting outside, and so there's always that kind of, just because you tend to see more people, there's always going to be more chance of a conversation. Whereas the kind of hiking routes that they are in the UK, where they're more sort of formalised and whatnot, you're less likely to meet people just on the fly, like people who aren't actually walking. And so, if you meet someone who's walking, you might share a pleasantry or something. You might not get a deep conversation unless you come across a farmer or, or something like that. But it's not to say that you can't experience the same thing, but I think it's just a different level of conversation. Because in Egypt, I find it's so much more unexpected that they think why are you walking here? And that opens conversation a lot more quicker. Whereas I think in the UK, it's something a lot more expected to see someone walking. So it's not a strange thing. And so you might just go and kind of float under the radar, you see what I mean?
Can you tell a difference in Egypt between, or if you ever walk in rural areas, but between, downtown metropolitan areas and a little more outskirts type of places? Are people different? Because here in the States, when I'm biking especially, like if it's a big city, I probably won't talk to anybody. Everyone's just busy.
Yeah.
People are moving too quickly. But out in rural areas, you see, a hundredth of the people, but chances are they're going to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, the geography of Egypt is quite peculiar in that a lot of the Nile is really where most of the people live, and that's where you're going to be walking most of the time. And so very rarely in my experience, you're going to be walking and there's not going to be many people, because you're going to be walking through the Nile Delta, for example. You're walking through farmland and stuff, and there's always going to be someone there. And so the walks that we've done there, we've never been sort of alone for more than like 5 minutes. There's always, someone walking towards a field to pick up his veg or something, or there's someone going home from a shop, or going to a mosque, or a fisherman going to and from the Nile. And so there's always like a hustle and bustle. And because the tracks you walk on, they look like hiking tracks, but they're just kind of the like untarmacked sort of roads used by farmers and stuff like that. But that's not to say the conversations are different in a city. Like Cairo is a massive city, and kind of obviously people are more busy there and stressed and whatnot, and so you're less likely to get more of a relaxed sort of philosophizing you might get from your farmer out in the sticks in the delta. That's not to say you'll still have a conversation. What we like to do, we used to live in Cairo, and I used to get just every now and again obsessed by the fact that I live near the pyramids, and it was just fun never to forget that, never to take that for granted. And so we used to just on a weekend just say, let's just walk to the pyramid. And so we'd go out and we won't take any maps with us or anything, or phones, just go out and try and get from our house by the Nile to the Great Pyramid just by asking directions. And, because it's just fun. I love the idea of just walking in Egypt, in Cairo, and just asking people, excuse me, where's the pyramid? And they'll go, this way, just like without even taking a second glance. And that was just a fun thing to do. And that gets you a conversation going as well. But out here in Sinai is a completely different kettle of fish. It is like a desert here. So I haven't yet done a big walk in Sinai, but with various things planned. But I think it'll be very different here.
I can imagine. What brought you to Sinai?
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. I'd like to introduce you to our newest sponsor, Gnarly Nutrition. I know you've heard about them recently because we've had some guests on recently that credits Gnarly for helping them do the adventures that we talk about on this show. So Chris Fisher was one who did the Vert Max. He did 400,000 feet of elevation gain in a month. Check out that episode. That was not too far back. And he credits Gnarly Nutrition for keeping his body literally sustained during that time, just packing in the calories. It's amazing nutrition for anyone doing anything adventure, endurance-based, whether that's in the mountains or bike packing or whatever. It's a great thing to have with you prior to an adventure training, and also during an adventure. And also Jason Hardrath, who recently did the 100 fastest known times. He did 100 mountains in 50 days and just was slamming Gnarly Nutrition. He also credits Gnarly for essentially keeping his body sustained. And so Gnarly Nutrition has been around since 2008. They were born in Utah's Wasatch Mountains, and they are committed to educating and inspiring athletes of all levels to be as nutritionally sound as possible. Their nutrition supplements are certified by NSF and have science-backed products free of hormones, free of GMOs, proprietary blends, and nothing artificial. So Gnarly is going to help you get ready and help you sustain during those huge adventure efforts. So if you're looking for the best tasting and the most trusted sports nutrition brand for any endurance athletes, go to Go Gnarly, and that is GNARLY.com, and use the code GNARLYADVENTURE15 for 15% off. And just, a personal plug here. I love Gnarly. I love the folks there. They're doing such a fantastic job. They have been so great to work with. They helped provide some products for our Journey to 100 film series that we were doing giveaways with at the end of every film screening. So it's been a pleasure to work with them so far. So if you'd like to support the folks that are supporting this show, definitely go visit GoGnarly.com. Many of you know that I work in the brewing industry, specifically with Athletic Brewing, and we make non-alcoholic craft beer, but we can also ship through the mail. But if you want to order an alcoholic drink, you oftentimes can't ship that through the mail. Well, you can now with Drizzly. You can have it delivered to your house for whatever occasion that you want to have alcohol shipped to your house, whether that's birthdays, weddings, graduation, Mother's, Father's Day, any sort of holiday. You can make up a holiday if you want to have a drink, because honestly, every day is a cause for a celebration. So if you're looking for the most convenient way to buy beer, wine, and spirits with delivery to your doorstep, and get this, in under an hour, Drizzly is the number one app for that. You can download Drizzly app, go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com. You can use the promo code SPRING5 for $5 off your first order. So whether you're having a big celebration at home or just a casual night, you have some friends over, the weather's not great, you just want to watch Netflix, go ahead and get the Drizzly app and use the code SPRING5 for $5 off your first order of beer, wine, or spirits shipped to your house in under 60 minutes. If you're looking for a high-quality professional service to help you with live streaming and recordings with 5 clicks, look no further than Melon. It is not complicated, no crazy signups, no downloads needed for guests or for you. It's going to help you create high-quality video or audio content, allow you to live stream it, or you can upload it later. You can multi-stream across Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, all at the same time to grow your reach. And when it records, it does separate audio and video tracks. So regardless of internet connection, it can get done, and then it will download, and then you can get it and edit it if you need to. Very customizable. Comes in HD, 1080p camera resolution, and you can actually take donations during live streams, in which Melon takes 0% of fees. You get to keep that. So if you're looking for a way to live stream some of your content, whatever that is, you can visit Melon app, and that's melonapp.com/ASP. I know we're back to normal in the sense of events are happening, but there's always going to be that virtual connection that's going to be important to maintain. So use Melon to grow your audience. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
What brought me to Sinai is the pace of life, I think, because here, well, my wife and I, we both work freelance, one of those digital nomad kind of people. And I'm obsessed with the sea. I love the sea. And if we can live somewhere that's more relaxed a bit, but nice pace of life, nice style of life, and it's healthy kind of way to live by the sea, and also work here. Why would we stay in Cairo where it's dusty and polluted? Although Cairo is a lovely city, there's lovely things there, but it kind of made sense to move here just for a bit of a change and a bit of a better style of life.
Wow, so interesting. So are you enjoying it so far? I don't know how long you've been there, but has it met those goals for you?
Yeah, it definitely has. It's a small town. I mean, it's...
Yeah, what's the town, by the way? I don't mean or near.
It's called Dahab, which is Arabic for gold, because when the sun rises, I know when it sets over Saudi Arabia, kind of it lights up and it kind of the sea is all gold.
Wow.
And it's about an hour north from Sharm el-Sheikh, which people might have heard of, on the Red Sea. And there's lots of big diving sites here. The amazing thing that's inspiring for me is, I think I mentioned the mountains. The opposite of that is just the coral reef, and it kind of drops off like almost 100 meters straight away, and you kind of can't see the bottom. So you kind of be floating around in the shallows, and then suddenly just boom, nothing below. And I find that just awe-inspiring just to be around. Like when you go out for just a swim in the morning and come back and you're just inspired to do stuff because the nature that's all around you. Actually, talking about walking, we've done several little walks around here, and we've come across several groups of Bedouin who've been just having a time by the sea. Because native people who live here are not Egyptians; they're Bedouin tribes. There's I forget how many tribes in Sinai, but they don't consider themselves Egyptian, although they are. They're sort of more attuned to themselves, and they have their own sort of dialect of Arabic, which is very different to the Cairo dialect of Arabic. So that's another thing we're learning. And at one point we went on a walk and we to a place called the Blue Hole, which is a massive sinkhole, a very famous diving site as well. And on the way back, we came across a group of women, Bedouin women, they told us that their weekly ladies outing by the sea. And thankfully, my wife was with us, and so she eased the way in, and they allowed me to sit with them. And they one of them had this metal flute called a ney that she was playing, that she learnt to play when she had her goats when she was a little girl, which they tend to do. And then because we have this kind of impression that they're all sort of very conservative women and stuff like that. They cover their face up and whatnot. But they quickly forget that, and they kind of just forget to cover their face up, and they're very chilled. And they start passing around like cigarettes they've kind of handmade, and they're kind of very dubious what's actually in them, although they kept insisting they were just normal cigarettes. We didn't partake, but it was quite funny to be there and just listen to their stories and hear what they had to say, and just to be part of that. And that's part of the thing that I love about being here, is to get involved with that and hear, spend time with those people and see how life's changed for them and what's going on.
I'm looking at your town, Dahab.
It's pretty cool.
And it's out there. You're off the beaten path. Do you feel that? I mean, it seems like it might have some tourists, quite a few tourists, but it's just, I've never heard of it, never heard of anyone from there or living there, and it seems like a nice little oasis.
Yeah, it is like that. I mean, it's you can probably see it's right by the sea. There's like palm trees around. It's full of goats in the streets. I love the goats. Their smiles and their strange horizontal pupils. And there's lots of foreigners living here, but it's a mix of foreigners and settled Bedouin. Foreigners who work in the diving shops and do kite surfing and that sort of stuff. There's a nice mix of people, really. Bit of like a nice community. It's quite small, but there's lots of stuff going on. And it's also very chilled if you kind of just want to have a laid back life away from the city.
So let's get into your walk, the walk you wrote your book about. Tell us about what inspired that. Obviously, you love to walk. We've been talking about that, but this was back in 2018. You were living in Egypt and you were getting tired of Cairo, and you decided to walk home, but not from Cairo. What made you pick up and go to Morocco and then start walking back to England?
I had plans to walk from Cairo to England, but the borders and political situations weren't really helping that. And so I kind of came up with a more kind of random way of doing it, which is I looked at a map and looked west to see what town I'd hit on the same latitude as Cairo. And it was Agadir in Morocco. And I love the Morocco is just kind of pretty much straight below England. And I like the idea in my head that I was still walking back from Cairo, just the same latitude, but just not the same geographical distance. That kind of made a lot of sense in my head. And so I thought, I'll leave the Cairo to Morocco walk for another day, and I'll just go to Morocco and walk back from there. So that was that. And I still plan on hopefully one day doing that. But that's how it all started.
So it was the latitude because of the change that it would introduce. Walking north up the latitude would give you some variety versus walking along the.
So the latitude thing was basically because it'd be on the same. I'd be walking from the same latitude as Cairo back to England, kind of following north the curve of the Earth. Yeah. But otherwise, and I'll see kind of how it changes while I was walking north. Obviously, walking from Cairo, if I'd walk I could have walked across Africa to Morocco.
Wow.
That would be a complete different trip, and that's something that I would still love to do, but it wasn't feasible at that time. Or walking the other way.
Would you go through the Middle East, not the Middle East, but like Lebanon, Turkey, and then through Eastern Europe, or would you go across Africa and then north if you did it that way?
Yeah, it's hard because both would be amazing journeys, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to choose. I think I'd probably flip a coin, but I think.
Well, go one way back to England, then come back the other way. Just make it a round trip.
Yeah, that solves it. Yeah. I think the going across Africa would be amazing because I like my background in Arabic language. That'd be amazing just to see all the different dialects, because you go from Egypt to Morocco, and then the two dialects of Arabic are almost unintelligible. And so to see that sort of change going across, that would be quite fun. But then again, walking north through Europe, through like kind of that sort of area, would be wonderful as well. I mean, I think I'll do as you say. I'll go one way, then back the other way. That's the only way to do it.
There you go. That's the only way to do it. That's awesome. So, well, take us through that walk from Morocco, which you then went through Spain, through France, and how long did that take? How many kilometers? And tell us about starting the journey. That had to feel maybe a little more frightening than some of your daily walks. I'm not sure. Maybe you weren't scared at all.
So in total, I spent about 6 months to walk from Agadir, Morocco to Taunton in England. And that's a roundabout route of about just over 4,000 kilometers. It wasn't direct, it wasn't straight. I think if I'd done it straight and gone straight through Spain, it would have been about 3,000. But I got caught up in all those caminos to Santiago, and so did a few dog legs and got my way home that way. But starting it, I was very apprehensive because I was really unsure of. It sounds silly now, I think, but personally it does. But I was worried that I wouldn't be able to actually walk in Morocco for some reason. I'd done research on this. I'd asked people on various groups on Facebook, which seems to be what I thought would be the best way to research this. But my experience of walking in Egypt had been you have to have kind of various permits signed off, and then there's checkpoints all over the place. And if you're walking and you look a bit dodgy with a backpack on, the police might just arbitrarily stop you and say, you can't come here for whatever reason. And so I just naively kind of put Egypt and Morocco together. Whereas Morocco, when I got there, it was just the wonderful thing was just no one cared, and that was just the best thing for a hiker who feels with your big backpack on, your first day, you're sweating because you're not used to it all. It's all hot and it's all uncomfortable. You're carrying all these water bottles because you can't fit them in your backpack, and you just feel very unadventurous and very, very stupid. The best thing to happen was just that no one paid attention to me. I was just someone else walking on the side of the road, and that's how I started the walk, and that was probably the best thing. I mean, it's better than having people shout at you or stop you. I just walked into anonymity. That was wonderful for the first few days.
What were some of the challenges that you were facing compared to your daily walks? Obviously, you had to pack enough to camp or to be out there for extended periods of time. Did you have a lot of experience doing that?
So I had quite a bit of experience of long distance hiking and camping. I've done quite a bit of hiking already in England and in France, and also I spent a year after school living in Australia in a really amazing school called Timbertop, which is north of Melbourne, which is an outdoor education school, which I did a lot of hiking there. And so I was pretty adept at hiking and packing a bag, how to pack a bag efficiently, which stood me in good stead, to be honest. But in terms of this was, I had packed with me a tent and a stove and all those, things you need to be a proper adventurer out in the wilderness. But my goal was essentially to try and spend my time with people and talk to people and, really understand and get to know the country through the people and their stories. And so I thought I'd have my tent as a backup, but I'll just kind of try and ingratiate myself to people and use couch surfing as a way of the application couch surfing as a way of kind of accommodation that's quite cheap and also exchanging culture and that sort of thing. And also I occasionally meet people who invite me to stay in their house. So the main weight in my backpack was water, really, carrying lots of water and various other things that I kind of realized I didn't need. I used my tent once or twice in Morocco, but that was a weight that I just carried with me because I knew I'd use it in Spain and France, which I did. But there was more sort of space and more sort of sparsely populated areas where I'd camp sometimes. In Morocco, you're kind of going through towns and villages all the time, and so I'd rather not kind of camp. I'd rather kind of just go and rock up at a place, sit at a cafe, try and be a friendly little foreigner, come to talk to someone, and then try and see what would happen. And sometimes I'd just sleep in the cafe if I didn't manage to make any friends, and that was perfectly fine. That was wonderful. The great thing about definitely Egypt and Morocco, in my experience, is the cafes just never tend to close. There's always someone there. And if you're
and they would let you sleep.
If you get on well with the waiter and whatnot, they tend to just say, "Yeah, don't worry, just sleep here." I mean, obviously, it could be a bit dodgy. Obviously, if you're in a kind of a built-up area, but in these villages, places like fishing villages along the coast, there didn't tend to be much. I didn't feel dangerous. I kind of tend to put my bag on my front in a dead man's hold and just doze off. And several times I'll do that, and then I'll get rocked awake by someone and saying, "Excuse me, do you want to come and have some dinner with me? Because you look like you're a bit lost." And so that would be nice.
So interesting. Wow. So what did you, from the point of view of people, maybe language, what did you start to notice some of the changes right away? Were the changes really tied around country borders, or was it more, obviously probably more nuanced than that? Tell us about the changes you were seeing as you made your way north.
The linguistic changes. The Morocco is full of. It's got its main Arabic dialect, Darija, which is different from the Egyptian dialect and a very peculiar dialect in itself. It's a mixture of Arabic and Amazigh or Berber languages, which was something I had to get used to. And then there's also different regions. I'm not an expert on Morocco, but there's different regions of these Amazigh languages from the south up until the north, and I wasn't able to get to grips with those languages because they're completely different from Arabic. I was mainly communicating in Arabic and French, but I did notice those differences as we go north. Some like pronunciation differences, as you have in any country, like between cities and towns and between the cultural area, the countryside areas, and then the towns, and north and south. There's always slightly different variations of how you pronounce things or what you say, and I'd pick those sort of things up as I would go. And other things like the landscape. I mean, the landscape in the south of Morocco is kind of what you expect when you look at if you Google it. It's beaches and dunes and wonderful deep blue sea. And then as you get further north, it becomes more sort of green fields. And I certainly wasn't expecting that as I got further north. I think one thing, one kind of really bizarre change that kind of stuck out to me. I'm not sure if I'm the only one to have this theory, but kind of I kind of pinned it down as my little theory that I put in my book. Is that my main thing every day that I'd have would be this type of coffee called a nos, which is Arabic for half-half. And it's a peculiar Moroccan coffee where it's half espresso, half foamy milk. And in the south, they pour the milk in the cup, and then they pour the espresso straight onto the top of that, and so it kind of floats around this kind of fun sort of jellyfish kind of shape, which is wonderful to watch. And then at some point in the middle of Morocco, I noticed it at a service station, bizarrely, after I just spent a night in the dunes in this sort of military zone where I'd been very scared, and I ended up camping in the middle of these bushes. And I came floating out in the morning to this service station for my morning coffee. And from then onwards, the coffee was always served opposite. It was espresso first and then milk afterwards. And that kind of obliterated all the kind of poetic jellyfish swirling in the coffee in this just brown liquid. And it was that all the way up until Tangier. And so that's my my take on the changes in Morocco. It's the coffee is like in the south is one thing, very poetic. The coffee in the north is brown liquid.
And it only had to do with the way they poured it in.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably just a very peculiar. I've got a very peculiar take on it. I mean, I'm not saying that's the whole thing of Morocco, but that was my take on it. It was a very arbitrary point in the middle of Morocco where the coffee changes.
Coffee changes. Well, tell me this: was there? How were the people treating you, and were people interested to know what you were doing?
Yeah, they were. I mean, I had my sort of little gambit. I would say to people, I'd introduce myself as Ibn Battuta, and Ibn Battuta was a Moroccan traveller from Tangier of all places, who in the 14th century travelled 29 years around the world as far as China. He travelled further and for longer than Marco Polo, for example. I think just after Marco Polo died. And he came back and wrote a book about it, or a scribe wrote his book for him and then published it. And there's this big thing, it's called Al-Rihla, it's called the trip, the journey, whatever. And it's this account of his travels. And it's very well known in the Arabic world today, this kind of like canon of travel literature. And the fact that he's Moroccan, which is wonderful, because I could walk along and say to people, they'd say, hello, what are you doing? This traveller person with a big backpack. And I introduced myself as Ibn Battuta, which kind of sort of means I'm the son of Ibn Battuta. And that would kind of, invoke reels of laughter, and we'll get on like a house on fire, and then we'll kind of just discuss what I'm doing. And even the simple sort of person in the countryside who was on farming the field or something would have heard of Ibn Battuta, in my experience anyway. And that was just wonderful because it broke the ice straight away, and we were in. They had like a something to kind of reach at. They could understand. Okay, this is the idea of someone's traveling in search of something, knowledge, or just traveling for travel's sake, because that's what this Ibn Battuta guy was doing. He was traveling ostensibly to go to Mecca, to the pilgrimage, but then he got carried away and kept on going to China in search of knowledge and spirituality and in his case, lots of wives and children. That wasn't my case, but that's lovely to have that sort of cultural point that you kind of reflect to and kind of a reference point that you both understand. And that was my experience throughout the whole of Morocco, actually. And that was wonderful. That kind of really helped, explain what I was doing to people. And throughout all Morocco, I got a really nice response from everyone I met, to be honest.
Take us through, as you made it through Morocco and into Spain, what was that? What did that look like? You got to Tangier.
Yeah.
And what did that feel like? And how did that differ as you got ready to jump the Strait of Gibraltar to Spain?
At that point, I was very unsure of what to do. I think part of me wanted to stay in Tangier. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been, but it's a wonderful place where you can just see Spain across the road, and it's also it's got a very nice downtown area, and it's got a history of like literary figures who've lived there and passed through. The beat poets have been there, and lots of writers have been there, and the travellers and whatnot. And so you can get caught away thinking, I'll stay here and just sip espressos on the balconies until I run out of money. And I toyed of doing that. I told him that I could just stay here and never leave. But then I had it was getting to mid-November. And so I think I really needed to get into Spain before it got too cold, because I still had to cross Spain and the Pyrenees into France in the middle of winter. And so I wanted to try and get up a good momentum. And so I was very sad to leave Morocco. I had such a good experience there, and I thought I got to get going. So off I went to Spain, and Spain was a completely different kettle of fish to Morocco.
November. You said you were getting into Spain in November. I mean, yeah, the Pyrenees are can be very cold. How did you? I assumed it would take some time to get from the southern portion of Spain to the mountains themselves, which would put you right in the dead of winter.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, it took me how long? About 3 months, I think, because Spain was a lot bigger than I had envisioned. I think in my mind, when I first thought about this, I thought Morocco would be the most difficult thing because there's no organized walking routes. I was making it up as I went along. I was walking along the beach or along the cliff tops, along shepherd's tracks, along hard shoulders, keeping the Atlantic on my left and just heading north until I hit Tangier. You get to Spain and Europe, and it's all sort of, tracks and hiking paths, and it's a lot more structured. But then Spain is just so big. And then you got the Caminos to Santiago, the pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela. And I'd heard about these in the north of Morocco, and I kind of was in the back of my mind thinking, okay, there's something I can use to get through Spain. I think originally before I thought of just getting to Tenerife and just bombing it through Madrid up to France. And that's the Google map route. But then that's not much fun. And so I ended up doing the pilgrimage routes to Santiago, which takes you to the right top left or the northwest of Galicia in Spain, and that's a massive dogleg. But that added on about a month and a half to the route. But it was definitely the best thing I could have done, because I think walking through Spain was wonderful just because walking is so easy. I mean, I think Morocco was definitely an adventure in the sense that I was making up as I went along. I had no deadline. I had no sort of stress of when I had to finish or when I had to stay somewhere, and I was just living every day. Spain was very much, it's like a walking highway. You just join these caminos and you go for miles and miles and months without stopping, because the tracks are all there for you. You can get lost, obviously, but then that's part of the fun, I think. And then so I eventually got to the north of Spain in something like late January, and ended up not going over the Pyrenees at all, but skirting around them on the coast. So I got that one out of the way around. So I got into France, right in the southwest, in Bayonne, and then just from France, it was just the simple case of walking up the coast like I had in Morocco, and then over to England. But yeah, each of the three countries, France, Spain, and Morocco, were very different in terms of how to walk there and what it kind of was, the kind of experience of walking there.
What at this point was one of the most interesting or bizarre or just fascinating encounters you had, whether it be with an animal or people?
I mean, you meet some great characters when you're walking on the routes in Spain. I met a Knight Templar who still has his scabbard, his Excalibur sword, and lives as a knight on this mountain in Spain. I think probably the most memorable encounter, if not just in Morocco, but probably maybe the whole trip, was this encounter of a man called Mohammed by a river. I'm about in the second week of my trip there, and I got to this river where I couldn't cross because it was flowing too fast, and I thought I need to get across to get to the town, the next town, because I wanted to end the day there and catch up and maybe write a blog and catch up on what with Wi-Fi and stuff. And I was distracted by these modern things, connectivity and whatnot, which is not the point of why I was doing this walk in the first place. But we get distracted, and then here comes the lesson. The man, as I was stripping off to cross in my boxers, everything in my bag, I hear a shout from behind me. A man steps out telling me to stop. I look round, and he was this kind of small man in a big baggy green jumper, weather beaten, and he just simply said to me stop, and then came down to me as I was getting dressed, hands on his hips, and shook his head and said, "No, it's too high, too fast. You'll die if you cross there. Come and have some tea with me." So I just said yes, and went had some tea on the dunes by his little shack. He's a fisherman from a little village nearby, and he had his brother there and a cousin, I think. And we sat by the fire in silence, just having tea. I slept for a few hours. I woke up again. We went down together to look at the river. It was still flowing, and it was still impassable. He said to me again, "Have some tea, it'll go down again." He was just a very calming presence and just sat there philosophizing about the world in French to me, and just sounded so wonderful. And ended up hearing his story, and he was this man who, although ostensibly now he was a fisherman who kind of a bit low on his luck, lived with his brother. He was just smiley, had this bright twinkle in his eyes, and he'd come from Casablanca in the north, which then was about, I think, over 150, maybe 200 kilometers away to the north. And he told me the story of he'd come from Casablanca to where we were then. He was 15, and he said he'd walked along the coast, the opposite to the way that I was walking then. And he said that he'd walk every day about 15 kilometers and just sit down and watch people. And I said, why did you do this? And he said, I was walking, trying to find someone to marry, trying to find a wife. And I said, did you find anyone? He said, no. And he started laughing, and we're just happy with his lot. It is this simplicity, this kind of romantic man who was impassioned with language, speaking French, which is obviously his second language then, philosophizing about it. And he was so happy to have met me doing something which he had once done himself the other way. And he was, he took me in, and I stayed the night at his house, and we had dinner, we had tea, very sort of simple thing, and watched some Egyptian films and just chatted and had a nice night. And then he also mended my broken shoes, and he knitted up my trousers and washed my clothes without me knowing. I woke up in the morning and I saw he'd done all this for me. It was just that, which was just so wonderful. It kind of really brought me down to earth, and really brought me down to realizing what I was doing this for, and what it all, what kind of the purpose of it all was. And he really kind of kept telling me, James, when you walk, do it just to reflect on your life and just smile. And that was just, it was really this simple thing, and it stuck with me for the rest of that 6 months, and it's still with me now. I mean, he's the person I put on the front cover of the book, and he's also someone I've got a printout photo of him staring up at me from the wall when I work, just as a reminder, to keep your feet on the ground, and also to keep getting out there and keep walking and keep dreaming.
Wow, that is too cool. It's those encounters that really stick with you. I love that. So I know we're getting a little short on time. Tell us about, you make your way up to Spain and France, and then into England. What was that like? How did that feel, getting back, quote, to your first home?
I think it was a mix of feelings, really. It was wonderful to finally finish, because I think by that point because when you finish a walk, I think it's probably the same with a long distance cycle, and especially when the end point is your home, you're a few weeks to go, you're kind of already in the kind of ending kind of frame of mind. This is coming to an end soon. What do I do next? You start to get worried about, okay, do I have to, do I get a job somewhere? What do I do? So I was trying to put that out of my mind. But when I did get to the end, I think I was relieved and happy, but then also after a few weeks of sort of the Zen-like state you get after doing a big adventure, and you get the kind of the downs that everyone experiences after a big gallivant when you've just been roaming but idle for a long time, of kind of existentialism of what do I do next, and what do I do with this? Days of looking at the map, thinking I'll never get to England, and then you get there, and then suddenly that whole section of your map looks very small, whereas for the past 6 months it looked scarily big. That's the strange thing to get used to. I think I spent the next year or so just almost denying I'd done it, and not wanting to talk about it, not wanting anyone to mention it, just kind of shutting it out of my mind for some reason, and then getting it back into, and then eventually I kind of realized, realized how much it was formative experience for me, and then going down to write a book about it, that really helped me sort of reflect on it and reflect on how much I enjoyed it and how much I got out of it. But it took a long time to process that.
Well, tell us about the book. What can people expect reading it? Because one of the reviews I saw was, definitely not your typical, long distance walking book. What do you think they meant about that?
Well, I think I tried to write it entertaining, and I tried to write it in an entertaining way, and also in a way that's sort of not over the top, not pretending to be something that it isn't. It's very much it's an account of a walk. It's not a philosophical treatise, if you see what I mean. And so I tried to keep it light and also a bit humorous, and also put in a bit of things that I picked up along the way, based on my own expertise about things I do about language and whatnot. But I try not to go towards hyperbole or go, be so amazed by these wonderful foreign cultures, where at the end of the day we're all very much the same. I just try to keep it down to earth like that, and also a bit tongue in cheek to some extent, and just not go over the top. At the end of the day, I'm someone who had the luxury to fly to the south of Morocco and spend 6 months walking home. I mean, it's wonderful, but there's lots of people who can't do that. And so I'm not going to shout about how hard it was or how dreadful it was or glory in those things. I'm going to vamp up the fun bits, the wonderful times, the interesting things. I think that's what they were talking about. But that's what I was aiming for anyway.
That's awesome. So where would you like folks to find the book? I know it's on Amazon, but is there anywhere else you'd like to point people?
Amazon is the only place it's available at the moment. I know that would anger some people. But unfortunately, that's the only place it's available at the moment.
No problem. We'll point people there. Is there any parting story or reflection or lesson you learned that you want to share with folks before we close out the conversation?
I think I would just say, if you're going for a walk in Morocco, take a stick with you. You might not think you'll need a stick, but use a stick because of the dogs.
The dogs. Help you walk at all, walking stick, but it not really, just mostly for the dogs.
It does help you walk. It eases the pressure on the joints and whatnot. But it's a wonderful thing to fend off wild dogs, because you'll 100% come up against wild dogs.
Oh man.
Even in Spain as well. I mean, but yeah, have a stick with you, because with a stick you look like a proper adventurer, and of course that's what it's all about at the end of the day, isn't it? Looking like a proper adventurer.
That's right. It's all for the gram, for the Instagram. No, that's awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us and telling a little bit about this story. It's so interesting, and have a beautiful day and rest of your day in paradise.
Thanks, Mason. It's really nice to talk to you, and I hope you have a nice start to the day.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.
Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Play season-long best ball, fantasy drafts where you only focus on the most fun part of fantasy, drafting your team. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. Underdog handles the rest for you. No waivers, trades, or setting your lineups each week. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100, get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, I've got a prescription for diabetes test strips. How much is the copay?
That could take me a while to calculate. In the meantime, you should think about over-the-counter Contour Next test strips. You get 35 for $19.99, and they're highly accurate. For full details, visit contournext.com/radio.